difficulties here, but thankfully this year is coming to an end. I think for most investors, it's been a tough one as we've seen assets being revalued across all the different asset classes. And the route has been pretty painful as trillions of dollars have been wiped out from the public and private equity markets, from real estate values, from crypto to the bond markets. There weren't many places to hide except cash. And even if you're in cash, you were losing 6-7% due to inflation. So there just haven't been places to hide. And while it's clear that the world's changed considerably, some of the changes have been temporary in nature. Others will be a little bit more permanent. I think the hard part for us as investors is going to be sorting out what is more temporary and what is more permanent, because we've seen it in a lot of different areas of the economy. And for example, supply chain issues have in many cases look to be or are being resolved or have been resolved, where others in the sourcing of critical assets are just the beginning of a major shift, whether it's some of the rare earths and other areas. So I think we're going through this shift that's going to be pretty impactful. And I think this is one of those points where we're at for the global economy and for the world in general, that we are in a transition, a regime change that'll be felt for some time to come. So I think we're seeing three elements of change, and the political one is obviously the changes in globalization and this battle between the democratic nations, the autocratic nations, and everybody else who's in between those two leading poles. I think that's going to be with us for some time. We're seeing that with the war in Ukraine. We're seeing that with some of the aggression in the South Pacific, in the South China Sea. So I think that's another one. I think socially, we're dealing with a whole different cost of living issue, which is putting strains on societies that are demanding more from governments at a time that governments have less to give. And at the same time, we're going through this economic change, which is a major reindustrialization of the global economy. And when you tie it into the changes that are going geopolitically, it's creating a realignment of how economic activity will flow into the future. So I think those are the important things to keep in mind. There are major shifts that are going on. A lot of that's been brought about by the war, by the COVID, by sanctions that were put on against China earlier. It's a cumulative effect of all the sturm and drang that's gone on since really 2008 and forward, and it's created this big divisiveness. So I think those are the big issues. We do see a number of investment opportunities that are going to be very helpful and ones that you can apply capital to, we believe, for some time. Electrification obviously is a big one. The digitalization of the world is going to continue. National security is a major issue, and biotech is one of the hottest areas if you can get it right. It's also one of the biggest challenges for due diligencing, but really some phenomenal opportunities with a lot of companies selling at single-digit multiples right now with really good growth prospects, and they're not the names that have worked in the past. So I think the other big theme is that there's going to be a major leadership change going on in the companies and businesses and industries that have worked versus the ones that had been driving us going forward. We still like North America, obviously, and the resource-rich nations. We think the big issue is dealing with and adjusting to, and who benefits from a higher interest rate environment and a higher inflation environment that we think is going to be with us for a more permanent period. Not that it's going to be the levels we're at now, it'll come down, but it'll be certainly higher than we've seen it before. And that means for us, this is a move back to quality and strong balance sheets, reasonable multiples in a period where there's going to be so much uncertainty. So just looking at global GDP, we were at 6% last year. Overall, we're looking at now, a couple percent. I think the IMF was at 2.7% for the world. Advanced nations growing only 1% next year, and developing nations only growing 2.7%. So it's going to be a low growth environment with a lot of pockets of opportunity, but overall it's going to be a tough period. So slow growth with high inflation is not a great mix for returns, but we think the inflation is coming down. We think headline inflation is going to continue to be a bigger issue for Europe and commodity importers, whereas in the US, core inflation is going to be the big issue. And that's because our wage issue is so high and our labor market is so tight right now that that's pushing the wage inflation up. And with a lot of the renegotiations going on, a lot of that will be put into the system on a more permanent basis. But core inflation coming down is going to be a big issue in the US. But global inflation, the easing of some of the food and energy issues should play out on the headline side, but we're still going to have some tough runs there. When you look at exchange rates, one of the big themes this year was the strength of the dollar. And one of the changes that's coming right now is as we've in the US are getting closer to the height of rate increases, which Powell said they have a couple more to go. The street thinks they're going to be cutting next year. I don't think that's the case, but I think what's going to happen is you're going to see the US leveling off after a couple more rate increases, maybe 50 basis points more. But the ECB came out today and said they're not to the halfway point of their rate hikes. Now, it's hard to know if they're halfway or not, but the idea that they're going to continue to be pushing rates up means that the US dollar should be easing some of the pressures there, and which will take some pressures off the global system, and that'll be quite helpful. I think we've seen a big change in short-term rates, and I think this is one of the areas where a lot of the pressure is being felt. This chart really doesn't do it justice, but global short rates are up, several hundred, almost 300 basis points this year. They've increased. 300, almost 400 basis points increase in short rates. And that does put a lot of strains on governments and puts a lot of strains on the system, but it also has made a big change. A couple of years ago, we had $17 trillion that was estimated to be carrying negative interest rates. That number is now down to only a couple $1 trillion. So you've seen a major shift up in rates, particularly out of Europe, and that change has had some pretty big impact on people and on returns. I think the other thing on the long end, you're seeing rates move, but not quite as much. I think it's fine, but the short end is really what's upending things. And that's really the government's trying to slow down the economy. But I think the big issue that's facing the US and others is unemployment. And we have an unemployment rate that is quite low, historically low, as you can see. But it's got to come up. And the Fed's view is that it needs to come up maybe by 1 million jobs. So that's probably going to be close to another % increase that you'd see there. And I think you're going to, or 0.5% increase. And I think that's going to create some real strains on the system. And it really puts state and local governments in a tough spot as they're being asked to do more, having to meet climate issues, having to make the energy transition, and then dealing with people with the hardships they've had over the last couple of years and the support that they need. It puts governments in a tough spot, but we need to see some movement on the unemployment rate in the US. There are other unemployment issues, and I'll point out one that is, I think, going to be one that needs to be close an eye on, is that Chinese youth unemployment is up in the high teens right now. I think it's around 18%. And when you have such transitions going on around the world and these lockdowns and reopenings going on, I think it creates a lot of unease around the populations. And when you have young people unemployed at high rates, we've seen it in the past in many other countries, that leads to a lot of social unrest. And that is not something the Chinese government really wants at this time. So I think that's something to keep an eye on. Watch the unemployment rate. It's going to be the big driver. So I think there's some key questions for next year. How will China's easing of COVID policy impact growth? I think it could go one of two ways. It could either be a big shot in the arm for global growth, or it could be a disaster, depending on how their infection rates go. But I think this is one of those key issues. What China does next year will determine a lot about how the rest of the world goes, but not the same way as it has in the past. I think the reorientation away from China that businesses are being forced to look at right now and countries are being forced to look at makes China one of the big swings for next year. I think their focus is going to be on the economy rather than on the geopolitical stuff. I think they need to get their social system stabilized, and economic activity is one of the best ways to do that. I think the other big question is, how does the war evolve in Ukraine? Are we going to see the West fold and give in to Putin, or are we going to hold the line and really continue to fight this thing through to the end. I think that's a big issue, and it has not only economic and political issues, but it has a lot of social issues that will come along with that, because eventually we're going to have to decide how this ends and who gets hurt, and is it the Ukrainian people or is it Russia that gets hurt for starting this? And then how do you deal with the rebuild and all that goes on? How do you get people engaged in that? If the war goes on too long, it's going to be hard to get people fully supportive of that. So I think this is a major question we still have to resolve. I think the other one is, will inflation ease to allow central banks to slow tightening? I think it's not clear yet. We believe that it's starting to come down, but the first two questions are really drivers for that, because China sucking up a lot of materials, if they reopen very quickly, could create some inflationary pressures, but it also could ease inflationary pressures too. So you have to be really careful about looking at it. But I think the big thing for public market investors, and I think it applies to the private markets too, is the impact that all these shifts will have on corporate earnings. And what does that mean for businesses going ahead? And how do we think about valuations in this environment? And when do you feel confident to really get after it? So I'll just tell you, from ARS's perspective, we see a number of opportunities in areas like steel, like the defense industry, where we know capital has to flow to do all the things that need to be done to bring us out of the problems we've had for the last several years, whether it's the war, whether it's the climate change issues. And what one wind tower takes up in steel is a lot of steel that comes out of the system. And because of the issues that are going on around the world and trade lines supply chains being disrupted, this is one of the areas that I think the U.S. and the West have a good positioning in, that can allow us to deal with some of the challenges going forward. But we think it's going to be still a tough year. There are pockets of opportunity. We think the markets will do okay, but not great. The fears of a major recession in the U.S. we don't see unfolding right now. We think the U.S. has had a series of rolling recessions that has made it a bit of a challenge to project what's happening. But we think industries have gotten hit already and are starting to come out of it on the other side. And we'll get past the COVID distortions and the war distortions and get back to a more normalized economic activity starting probably in the second half of next year, moving into the beginning of 2024. So Mark, with that, I'll stop and open up for discussion.
Thoughts, questions?
And I wish everyone a happy New Year.
Hi guys, this is Yvonne. Sorry, my camera's off. My regular picture looks much better than I do. First thing in the morning. My question to you is anybody seeing any alternatives to steel? What are the other alternative metals that are coming up? I think there's a lot of discussion about those.
Well, I have seen continued talk about hemp in construction, but it's a big issue.
Well, I'll give you one where it's going to be very difficult. And you look at the chip facilities that are being brought into the U.S. to be developed. They can't have vibrations in them. So the amount of rebar that goes into each one of those plants is far greater than it is in any other building that's being developed. So you can see the demands continuing to grow. The wind towers are, I had the number, I forget, but it is a lot of steel goes into one wind tower. We're building tons of them. The amount of copper that's going to be needed going forward, we keep talking about replacing copper, but we still haven't done that to any degree. So I think that a lot of the natural resources are going to continue to be as important as they've ever been, if not more important.
Well, and steel, it's again, why U.S. versus other parts of the world? It's going to go back to energy costs.
Yep. Yeah, and that is a big issue. The U.S. energy advantage is, I think, one of the things that people really have to focus on. It's actually the Achilles heel of Europe right now.
It is.
It's also not China's strong point either, even though they use a lot of energy. They haven't been very efficient with it. So I think there are real opportunities for the U.S. to pick that up. And I have to check the number, but I think the steel industry in the U.S., the combined market cap is about $100 billion. So just think about that.
Which takes you to met coal.
Yep.
And some other parts of the.
Yep,
people have to-
supply chain.
And EV supply chain. Sorry, Janan, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add some additional alternatives for Yvonne's question. We're seeing
Thank-
composites as another growth area still as alternative to steel. Even as a rebar alternative, we're seeing increase in activity in basalt fiber as like mini bars, if you will, that are mixed with the concrete for reinforcement. And then also some anti-seismic properties as well. Also, carbon fiber has been known, but with the, anti-carbon kind of thing, basalt is looking kind of interesting, especially if there's a possibility for use of induction heating to manufacture it. It could increase efficiencies on the level of like fiberglass, right? So composites is one thing we're seeing a trend.
Yep. Good point.
Mark, Rob has a question.
He always has a question. Hi, Rob.
Hey, guys and
Hey, Rob.
ladies, good morning. So last week, I brought this point about the release of Brittany Griner. And I guess, Steve, you saw the last couple of days, correct me if I'm wrong, Putin has come out with thoughts of openness, I guess public thoughts of openness to talk about Ukraine.
Yes, I
yeah,
did see today that Lavrov said that they would be open to a settlement as long as Ukraine gave up everything that
Right.
they have right now. So it's
Right, and I guess where I was coming from, and Mark, I welcome your input. I'm not sure if Adam's on, but I think the thought last week was this was a humanitarian move on the Griner side, but I think we all recognize this is the humanitarian aspect is less effect. My question is, do you think this is real? And I guess secondly, my thoughts of the release of Griner was, I thought that was less humanitarian, more strategic, with respect to appeal to women, appeal to diverse sector like LBGT, more so appeal to things like commercial enterprise like sports. Jack, you recognize that with a professional athlete like Griner. So that's a little bit of thought there. I thought this was more beyond humanitarian. I wanted to see how things played out, and lo and behold, a week later, there was some developing news. So thoughts there.
Well, one thing, China has been pushing Putin to try and behave better, maybe end the war, potentially. Putin came back and said, yeah, I'm open to it, but on these terms, which are terms that he knows Ukraine can't agree to. And the hope is that they force the West into pushing Ukraine into agreeing to an unfavorable deal. And I think that's really one of the big issues as we go into next year is, does the West hold and support Ukraine, or do they fold because of their own strains? And I think that's going to be one of the big determinant factors for what happens going forward. But I think a lot of that, Rob, is coming from China, not from Putin wanting to do anything.
And I'll be raising my hand, but I won't. I'll do it next time. I just wonder. I heard from another pundit or another conversation that actually the U.S. should be motivated. Will continue to be motivated to supply arms to Ukraine because it does support our manufacturing facilities. I mean, this is not a negative. It's just that it's like when you support a country during what's going on, we do benefit to some extent. So.
Yeah, the U.S. is one of the missile manufacturers of the world. So it's not bad for our defense industry at all when there's war. And we already have to refill our inventories from what we've drawn down. So it does help, but I don't think that's the goal.
The other quick thing was that, this was after the Ukraine president addressed I guess both the Senate and the House last week in Washington. And that was, in some independent reviews, sort of the worst nightmare from the Russia side, although there was some resistance by some Republicans on not attending because of unlimited spend. But, we've got some defense assets, and I, hear you loud and clear. It's, that is something that is, bullish to the extent that defense has become more ESG friendly. So,
Yep. I think the other issue that, to Yvonne's point, our whole manufacturing system is going to benefit from our energy advantage that we have and the need to get to more trusted and secure supply chains. And many of our Western allies will certainly, after their experience with Russia, feel that the US might be a better alternative for that, but not solely. And I think that's the thing, that you have the democratic nations, the autocratic nations, but you also have everyone else that's not a major player. And, whether it's the African nations, Latin American nations, parts of Southeast Asia, the Middle East, that are all looking for how do they win and how do they benefit from this. And the way they really benefit is to play both sides against the middle and take the best you can from the West and take the best you can from the autocratic nations and do what you can there. But I think you're starting to see a lot of shifts, and you'll see some new relationships formed over the next year or two from a geopolitical perspective that'll be very different than what we've seen before.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting, the Zelensky speech, and I'm seeing that there's some wording from the new House leadership that they might not have a full blank check, but it was really rather bipartisan and huge amounts of money. And you saw with Macron and the Germans, they wish they could have such a backbone, but they have no defense. They're solely reliant on NATO and our backbone. But this is the time. It's a pivotal time.
It just seems like the investment we're making into Ukraine is a pittance compared to what Russia has to invest in that war, and that in terms of return on investment in establishing ourselves and taking down one of our main enemies and who we're opposing. I mean, the budget that we're spending in comparison to our total military budget is very minimal. I mean, it's a great return.
I saw something, I don't know if the number's right, so maybe Stephen or others can help. I saw something to the tune of what, if this 40-some billion goes through, we may be up to $100 billion of sending money to Ukraine. And this article suggested that Russia's annual budget is less than that across their entire military. Has anybody ever seen any numbers along those lines?
The Russian.
This is Hamlet. Those numbers are generally accurate. The one misconception, though, is we're not sending buckets of money to Ukraine. We're actually sending very little money to Ukraine. What we're doing is, in essence, giving the defense industry the opportunity to send to Ukraine just dozens and dozens of weapon systems and units and devices that were set for destruction, and we're going to be written off. We're actually going to we're actually getting some money back for, and that's freeing up the defense contractors to go ahead and redeploy those assets into near range weapons. So your point there, Joel, is spot on. If we wanted to stop Ukraine and we wanted to deploy troops and put boots on the ground, the amount of money that we would be spending and the amount of lives that we'd be putting at risk from the U.S. would be tremendous. In this case, we have millions and millions of Ukrainians who are vested, and they want to fight the Russians, and they're willing to do it. And what they're looking for are arms and weapons from us. And I hate to say it, but when you look at conflicts like this, one of the things it does do is it does generate an economic activity. So we are going to benefit from that in the long run, I think.
So does anybody have a concern that by taking this next step and sending Patriot missiles that we're obviously going to have feet on the ground, because these systems are very complex systems, and chances are now you're starting those first steps towards getting closer and closer to that danger zone, where rather than have the Ukrainians fighting the Russians, that you'll have the US on the ground, and the minute US troops that are actually US troops and not mercenaries get into the conflict, and we have wounded soldiers in some capacity, doesn't that tend to, create potential issues moving forward?
It does, but to to assume that we don't have active duty boots on the ground in Western Ukraine, for sure in Poland, obviously, would be naive. So are we already there? It's safe to assume that there's probably Western interests already there in Western Ukraine. But in terms of kind of the front line, not as much. But the Patriot defense system isn't something you put in the eastern provinces. It's something you put around the power plants, around the civilian infrastructure, around the cities that Putin is trying to attack from a distance. So if we think we have a system in place that's going to be able to absorb thousands and thousands of inbound rounds from Putin and have minimal risk to our people, that's a bet I think the administration is probably willing to take, because we're going to take very little damage. We're going to expend a bunch of rounds, and what Putin is doing is just continuing to burn through inventory, which he's starting to have less and less of, both in the ability to manufacture domestically, but as well as getting replenished from mostly Iran. Because as far as I know, China has been very, it's the right way to put it. I don't think they have been supporting Russia from direct military aid, which is where they need it most right now in terms of ammo, weapons, and artillery.
Hamlet, two-part question. One, though, I understand the Patriots don't work so well against drones. What's the best drone defense capability that we can provide?
Selfishly speaking, it's one of the companies we're an investor in. But you're starting to see, I think Raytheon's got one, Epirus is one. So you're starting to see some conversations around ITAR restricted platforms being sent into Ukraine. In those cases, they would have civilian advisors making sure that those systems are being manned and operated by either our guys or people we have control over. Yeah, Patriots aren't meant for drones. The good thing about the drones is a lot of the drones that they're getting, particularly from Iran, what they did, Iran, if you guys recall, during the Afghan and Iraq wars, were able to divert and shoot down a couple of our drones, and they've gone and backward engineered a drone technology that was 15 years old. They've made some modifications ever since then, but they're not nearly as accurate as what we have on our side. So it's literally launching a large number of drones towards a target, try to take it down. For those, we do have conventional defenses. There aren't not necessarily Patriot systems, but systems that'll do the job. And I would assume those are already being deployed there.
Fair enough. My second part was what's happening in Iran. I saw that Musk noted that he's given 100 Starlight satellite dishes so that to their resistance.
Yeah, I'm getting ready to put up my next Iran update, but I think what we're looking at in Iran right now is a status quo for the foreseeable future. I think the civilian population has basically, they're done. They're not going to give up. I don't think you're going to see massive thousands of people in the streets protesting because that makes them an easy target for the regime. But I think you're going to see continued strikes, continued flash mobs, continued resistance against the regime. The issue here is, what does the regime do on their way out? The Shah's son has become a lot more vocal about trying to talk about unifying the various different factions that want change and resistance, to unify, to act as a front against the mullahs. The issue with Iran, though, right now is, and I don't know how much credence to put into this, but you're starting to hear JCPOA come up again, and I don't know if this is Iran pushing this or if this is Biden trying to grasp for some sort of a foreign policy victory in his last 2 years before he's up for re-election. That would be an issue, obviously, because that could set a whole bunch of dominoes in motion, whether it's an escalation of conflict between the House Assad and the Iranians, or kind of the unconventional thought is, do the Turks and the Azeris, along with the Israelis, now take action, giving the conventional Sunnis or the House Assad in the Gulf the high ground of not getting involved in this conflict. So that could become an issue. Absent that, I do think I'm convinced this regime is done. The issue is when do they get removed and how much damage do they do on the way out? That's kind of the unforeseen issue, or that's the unknown there. The next big seminal event, I think that if it's not JCPOA, the next big event that I think could kind of escalate tensions inside Iran is going to be the death of Khamenei. He's in his 80s, cancer survivor. He's not in good health. He took about a month off in September. Unknown exactly what that was for, but when he dies, there is going to be a power vacuum within the hardline leadership of what does Iran look like. And there's everything from speculation that Khamenei names his son as the heir apparent, which I think half of the clerical and military industrial hardline complex does not want. So that could introduce an interesting scenario here in terms of what happens inside Iran. In terms of why this matters, though, you guys heard me talk about this prior. Iran, I do think, is our single biggest foreign policy Rosetta Stone. If we fix Iran, we've neutered Putin and the countless amount of support that he gets from Iran. We've cut out funding and material support for Assad, for the Shia in Yemen, and obviously Hezbollah. And we've taken a significant trading partner, energy partner off the table for China. And I think the Gulf Arabs and MBS do want some sort of a détente and a renaissance in the Middle East. And they are happy to do that with the Iranian people, just not the existing regime. So the longer term implications of what happens to Iran, I think, are tremendous and aren't really being considered.
And Hamlet, if you play that forward, the timing of that, given the struggles in the developed nations economically that they're all dealing with now, the timing would be quite good for the Middle East to take advantage of that economically and raise their stature. So
Absolutely
an
would.
opportunity to have a bigger place that they've been looking for some time on the initial stage.
And what role is Turkey playing? How do you see Turkey in all of this, Hamlet?
Turkey is an interesting spot. I think Erdogan's going to have some issues in 2023. I believe he's up for election. I think he survives that election potentially, but there is a divisiveness happening in Turkey where I think Erdogan and his party want to align themselves with China and with Russia. But I think the rank and file populists do not. They want to be more nationalistic. They don't necessarily want to be pro-US or pro-Europe. They want to be pro-Turkey, which means not being in bed with China or Russia. I don't think Turkey wants I think Turkey probably does better with a stable Middle East, obviously, and has a better relations with the House Assad and the Iranians. So do I see a scenario where Turkey does take action against Iran if Iran goes down the path of a nuclear state? That's kind of that's the right way to put it. That is a highly plausible, low probability event that I think could upend the apple cart in the Middle East. Because if you look at the way the Middle East has been run over the last 200 years, you've had three conflicting power centers. You had the House Assad and kind of the House of the Sunni. You had the Caliphate and you had the Iranian government. And throughout the last 200 years, those three sides have never been on the same sheet of paper, and two have always aligned against a third. So that's going to be the interesting piece to see where Turkey ends up falling. Do they go down the path of nationalistic and continue the Ataturk reforms? If that happens, then maybe at that point it is some sort of an action against Iran, or do they go ahead and side with Russia and China and Erdogan holds power? And if that's the case, then I think they sit on the sidelines and just do what Turkey does best, which is try to play all sides.
Fair enough.
Forgive me, but I don't understand why you think the current regime is done.
The Iranian regime?
Indeed.
I think the people have had it. What you're starting to see right now is
People
they're
have
not
had
just.
it.
I'm
I
sorry.
agree. Concur. The people
Yeah,
have
they've had it. So I don't think this resistance or this movement for regime change, or I'm sorry, reform is going away. And I don't think that people are going to want this regime in power. So whether it's 6 weeks from now or and it's, again, this could, I mean, I said they're done. I'm not saying they're done by 2023 at some point. I can go back to Iran because it's a Western leaning country. No, I'm not saying that. And this could take years for this thing to unwind. But just like Putin, I think both of these regimes are done. The issue is going to be how destructive, how violent it gets before they're taken off the stage, and the timing of it. Russia, I mean, there's a scenario that Putin does survive and last for years to come. Same thing with Iran. But I also see there are scenarios where this thing escalates and very quickly unravels, and you do have regime change in both countries. But in Iran, the society's had it. What you haven't seen in prior demonstrations and protests in Iran is attacks against the clergy. You've not seen that. You've not seen attacks against Khomeini and kind of the Islamic the idols of the Islamic Republic. What you're starting to see now is that happen. You're starting to see mullahs and clerics who are walking around in robes and turbans are being advised not to do so because they're being targeted and harassed by people in the streets, something that never would have happened 3-4 years ago. You're starting to see direct attacks against posters and images of Khomeini and Khamenei, something that never would have happened in Iran 4, 5, 10 years ago. I think the society overall is done. If you look at the demographics, over 50% of the Iranian population is under the age of 50, and mostly are women, and none of them were around when the Islamic Republic came to power. The country's been secularized over the last 25, 30 years. And they get and to the point now they don't want the theocracy in power anymore.
Hamlet,
All that seems to be true, but what is, I mean, I guess what I thought I learned in Egypt is as long as you have the army, that doesn't really matter.
Correct. So there's two parts to that consideration. One, you have the conventional Iranian military. Their job is to defend the borders. And then you have the IRGC, which is the Revolutionary Guard and the Basij. They are the Praetorian Guards of the Islamic Republic. Their job is to fight all enemies, both domestic and foreign. The IRGC has taken over the country from a military, industrial, and energy complex standpoint. A handful of families, 5, 7, 10 families, control all the wealth in Iran. What you're going to see happen, I think, is at some point, the IRGC and elements within the industrial complex, so to speak, are going to wake up and realize that they have much more to gain by helping remove the clerics and the theocracy out of Iran and maintain a kind of a Russia-like oligarchical control over the entire country, than risk being deposed, whether it's by foreign action or by the uprising of the people. And you're going to see some sort of movement against the clerical establishment. That, I think, is a highly probable scenario, especially when Khamenei dies. So you'll see a part of the military, part of the Praetorian Guard, I think, splinter away and make some sort of a covenant with the people and say, okay, we're going to get rid of the clerics. We're going to loosen reforms. We're going to bring back rock and roll and MTV, and we're going to integrate with the West. But we're 100% in charge of this country. Full stop. That's the
now,
the best immediate outcome, I think.
Let's play that out. Now, what does that mean? I'm just trying to think of investment strategies. How does that play out with both like the political, I guess the power bases of the region? Because it seems to me that you could have a renaissance of the GCC.
Absolutely, you could. Absolutely, you could. So, like I said, I think MBS, the Middle East, wants some sort of a Middle Eastern renaissance. They don't trust a theocratic, controlled Iranian government that views the Sunni as the heretics that they want to take off the face of the earth. Can't really be partners with like that. Now, a bunch of Shia who care about themselves and greed and money first over theocracy and don't want to bring on the end times. Yeah, I can strike a deal with those. So if that starts to happen, then I think you start to see an opportunity for a massive boom in the Middle East. Though I don't want to see Iran be run by a bunch of oligarchs. That I think is a better immediate outcome than a massive civil war that causes millions and millions of lives to be lost. And it's just a bad scenario. So
Andrew Voss has a question, or his hands up.
Separate but related question, and maybe better reserved for Adam, who I don't think is on the call. To what degree do we believe the reports of Putin's cancer? And let's say that does head down a bad path for him. how does that look with the power structure in Russia affecting this whole paradigm? Any
Yeah.
thoughts?
Yeah, that's a good question, Eric. There's been all sorts of speculation of whether Putin has or has not been sick. It's hard to argue that he hasn't gone through something. Just the paranoia around COVID, I think, gives you a lot of indicators that there's something there. Now, whether it's into some sort of remission, who knows? The issue with Putin is kind of that whole Mad King syndrome. Is on his way out. What is he willing to do to the country? There's been, I guess, a long-standing understanding that there are systems in place that by the time Putin or the Tsar or whoever says go, and the minute that you have nuclear weapons launched or whatever, there's enough layers there that somebody's going to rise up and say, no, we're not going to do this. I think the more realistic scenario is Putin has probably deposed somebody within the Inner Praetorian Guard that sees this as their opportunity to assume power. The issue is, though, is the people who come to power in Russia are going to be maybe a degree or two more sane than Putin, or more, what's the right way to put it, less inclined to light the world on fire, but we're not getting a better outcome there. You're not going to get a significant regime change. Where in Iran, I think you have an ability to pivot there. The hope you have there is whoever takes over in Putin for Putin is younger and understands that they sit on a massive amount of wealth, and the best way to not to fuck that up is not to start a world war. So you see some de-escalate.
And it begs the
Some
question,
de-escalation there.
sorry to interrupt you. It does beg the question of earlier of the Iranian people. Well, to what degree have the Russian people had enough? You know,
Yeah,
over the span of time.
yeah, that's harder to handicap. And until you see, even if all of Russia is up in arms, until you see demonstrations, until you start seeing real protests and real anger coming out of really the two cities that matter, St. Petersburg and Moscow, I think Russia's at this point fine. But look, Putin right now is training up 500,000 troops to throw back into the meat grinder in Ukraine once the land thaws in April, May. By many estimates, their body count right now is anywhere between 75,000 to 100,000 people. Putin initially committed roughly 250,000 people into this Ukraine invasion. If you apply those same numbers, that's a lot of body bags coming home. Does that ignite some sort of resentment at home? One would hope so, but again, unless there's a complete breakdown in Russian society, I don't see any kind of regime change in Russia that's meaningful unless you have a complete collapse.
Hey, Hamlet, how much pressure is this Magnitsky putting on the sanctioned wealthy people in Russia that support his regime?
Should I say that again?
The Magnitsky Act
Okay.
that allows targeting of sanctions of wealthy individuals that support Putin,
Yeah.
where their assets get frozen.
Look, you're looking at two countries that have mastered the whole concept of avoiding and circumventing sanctions. It makes it demonstrably more difficult to do business, but I don't think it's an end all be all, because you've got to be able to put massive resources to sanctioning the entity and the various different things that they set up to circumnavigate sanctions.
But there's
unless
a lot of
you're willing to fully cut off an entire country from global trade, which I don't think we're ready to do. Sanctions, I don't think are gonna. I don't think have a meaningful impact.
Emily,
Hey,
you
hey, Mark,
don't think
hey,
it's
Mark,
going to wear down the industrial base by them not being able to source all the parts that they need?
You would have to make sure that you're paying attention to every shell game that they play. Is it going to make it more difficult? Yes. Is it going to have a longer term whittling effect? Yeah, the potential is definitely there. But in the near term or short term, I don't see that being a major issue. And I don't see, like, I hope I'm wrong, but I don't see the West in unison going after every asset, every opportunity as it relates to
Well-
sanctions violations with Russia. I hope I'm wrong.
So what's different about this Magnitsky Act is that it's actually worldwide. There's other, like Australia passed this as well within their government, that they can also lock down and freeze assets in concert with U.S. government. I mean, there's several countries that are signing on to this, and it's basically freezing assets or resources in place that they can't use it or be able to access their funds or assets from ultra high net worth individuals that are supporting the Russian current government.
Rob Colorado, did you have a question or comment?
Well, I was just going to switch mode for a moment, but I think Luke's point was well received. But Mark, I was in New York the other day and I came across some of these Michigan fans. So congratulations on Michigan and Ohio State in the final four.
They may be in the final two, by the way.
Well, yeah, I guess I wanted to hear a little bit from the sports side and consumer side that it sounds like
Switch gears here. Okay.
people are kind of getting, people are going in droves to be supportive. And, I guess they're talking about if they go to the championships in California, they want to be there. But I mean,
I'm going to host an event on if we make it there. I'll host an event in Irvine on the 8th, and you can be an honorary Michigan alum.
Well, you know what? Ohio State's got to beat Georgia, which is not going to be easy.
Regardless, Michigan's got to beat TCU, and if we do that, we're going there. And
Are you going to invite Penn State alumni to this event, or are they out?
well, I think it becomes a Big Ten festival.
Well,
We might
we're going to
have to have like a Big Ten pickleball type of event.
There you go. Well, Penn State's going to take care of the Rose Bowl before you guys get there.
Well, just Mark, my thoughts are that if in fact Ohio State beats Georgia, Michigan wouldn't want to play a second time Ohio State has revenge in its mind. They would become the favorite.
They would not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, keep me posted on that. And if not, I might have a couple of people to recommend in Southern California to attend. So that's congratulations on being this far.
Absolutely. I might have to. My family got a little sick of it, but it was cold in Miami, so I had to wear my sweatshirt, right? And oh my God, I'm probably on the half-hour mark. Go blue, go blue. And
Mark, before we wrap up, I just wanted to thank Anessa for all the work she does behind the scenes for,
yes.
she helps me out every week, but the whole community.
She helps me out every minute.
So special thanks to Anessa for all she does. She's the
Absolutely.
she's the star of the show. Thank you.
I want to come back to the steel point for a moment. And Mark, you said met coal here.
Yeah.
Thing. Okay, I am pushing an investment idea, and I own some of this, by the way, to be completely straightforward about it. But I urge you to look at something with the symbol METC, which is a met coal company, which is extremely cheap. First of all coal companies are extremely cheap, but there is a distinction between met coal and thermal coal, obviously, and it means something. Yep. And second, which is about to distribute in January or February, a spin-off security to all of its stockholders. And I think they've done a very bad job, and this spin-off security will be a dividend paying or distribution paying security, which will mimic a royalty on a bunch of coal assets that they own and are mining, and also a tolling fee on some cleaning plants. So it will greatly increase the payout on this stock from what will be two securities afterward. The market has no idea what the hell's going on here. The company's done a terrible job of trying to explain it to the market. If you look at the analyst reports, there's nothing even in there about them. So I think this is Now, this is a small cap deal. You can't deploy a lot of money into this, on the thing. But I think everybody should take a look at it. It trades around, I don't know, 9 or 10 or something right now.
Mhm.
I think you got a shot here at 25 in a few months. So
What was the name of that again?
the company's called Ramaco.
Ramaco. Well,
But the
what,
symbol is METC, like met coal.
so just basically, what's annual revenues, either net
Oh,
profit?
I don't know, 300 or 400 million of annual revenues, a couple of 100 million of EBITDA, this kind of thing. Mark, not very big,
Okay.
But trading very cheap on whatever you want to look at. On a price earnings rate.
Last year was
The
almost
ratio.
300 revenue, 46, 47 of EBITDA or EBIT. And I assume it's up, given where met coal prices are.
It was as low as 2 or 2.5, something like this in the very bottom of the COVID.
I never think of share price. I think of just enterprise value relative to, it's about market cap's 440. I don't know what's the debt.
For the debt, probably the enterprise value at the bottom of the COVID thing was less than 100.
Right.
The yield is decent.
40, 50, not too much debt relative to more EBITDA than debt, at least last year.
Yeah, and
All
the
right.
debt was just incurred to buy
Just-
another chunk of met coal reserves, which are adjacent to their existing operation.
But you're seeing these kinds of things in the oil and gas industry too, right? That you could.
Well, long term, I really love the oil and gas space, Mark, but short term here, I'm nervous. So there's a timing element in all this that makes me reluctant to say, geez, go buy some US natural gas producers right now, because I am concerned about natural gas prices in the States next spring, when there really isn't going to be any more export capacity for a couple of years here to speak of. And, the production is creeping up. So, I am concerned that this could be weak into the shoulder next spring, and so I don't want to say buy it right now. The Ramaco thing, I think you should buy it before they spin off the second security.
Fair enough. You and I are overdue for a chat.
Yep, this is a good week
But
for it.
he makes a good point, Stephen Burke, for your macro outlook. If U.S. natural gas prices could fall. I mean, you saw that
Make
actually.
manufacturing come back even more.
Well, they have fallen. Let's be straightforward about this.
Well, they fell partly with that fire in Louisiana. Some of that capacity went out, and then it's come back. But I wasn't seeing all the production coming. You're closer to that, so if that is happening.
Well, more or less, there's 5 BCF per day of natural gas production more now than there was 90 days ago. Okay. And that's that may not seem like a lot, on 100 million a day or 90 some million a day. But, these are markets. When they get a little bit out of balance, they move.
Mhm.
So it's,
Just what is our export capacity, and are we increasing that? And it's a longer term infrastructure play, but
there's nothing really happening between now and 2020, be 2025. The next 2 years are relatively dry here.
Got it.
So anyway, so my best idea is Ramaco Resources met coal.
Yeah. Can